The deafening crack of splintering timber shattered the dead silence of my house at exactly 3:11 a.m. My eyes snapped open. The glowing red digits on my nightstand blurred as a blinding, high-lumen flashlight beam violently sliced across my bedroom wall. Shouting. Heavy boots stomping on hardwood. Pure, concentrated chaos. Before my sleep-fogged brain could even process the violent intrusion, rough hands grabbed my shoulders, violently yanking me from the mattress. I hit the floor hard, the air driven from my lungs. A heavy knee drove directly between my shoulder blades, pinning my spine against the floorboards. The icy, unforgiving bite of steel locked aggressively around my wrists. Do not move. Keep your head down. In those chaotic first seconds, human instinct begs you to panic. But when you have spent 22 years serving in the military as an elite federal investigator, panic is a liability you train yourself to completely ignore. Adrenaline flooded my veins, but my mind forcefully compartmentalized the fear. My voice emerged utterly flat, completely controlled. I am not resisting. I am fully complying with your orders. My cheek was pressed brutally into the floorboards. I could smell the faint scent of the citrus and beeswax polish my wife used every Sunday. It was a sickeningly surreal, domestic detail amidst a terrifying tactical raid. Then, from down the hallway, I heard the sound that made my blood run absolute ice water, a scream, high-pitched, breathless, and utterly terrified, my 6-year-old daughter. She had been violently torn from her sleep by the sound of armed men kicking in her father's door. The primal terror in her voice bypassed all my military discipline and hit me squarely in the chest. "There is a child in this house," I roared, my calculated calm momentarily fracturing. "She is in the back bedroom. Keep your weapons pointed at the floor. Do you understand me?" A gruff voice barked from the doorway, confirming the children were secure. They hauled me to my feet. I was wearing nothing but boxers and an old faded army shirt. My bare feet dragged across the cold wood as they marched me out of the sanctuary I had spent years building. As we passed her room, I saw her. My little girl, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, her eyes wide and wet with a trauma no child should ever have to witness. A female officer was kneeling beside her bed, speaking in hushed, soothing tones. "Daddy's right here," I called out, fighting against the officer's grips. "It is a mistake. I love you." They shoved me forward, pushing me into the kitchen. Standing there in the doorway was my 17-year-old stepson. He was wearing pajamas, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. His face was a turbulent mixture of deep confusion and barely contained fury. He was terrified, but he was fiercely standing his ground. He had lost his biological dad when he was just a little boy. For a decade, I had painstakingly earned his trust, proving day by day that I would be the father who stayed. Now, he was watching the only father figure he had left getting dragged away like a violent cartel boss. "Listen to me." I locked eyes with him, commanding his focus. "Call the lawyer. The emergency number is on the fridge. Then go hold your sister. Be the man of the house until I get back." He gave a sharp, resolute nod. He was holding together. I had never been prouder of him in my entire life. They marched me out the front door. The crisp autumn mountain air bit into my exposed skin. The entire neighborhood was bathed in the frantic, strobing wash of red and blue police lights. The frame of my front door was completely splintered, hanging sadly off a single hinge where the battering ram had struck. Neighbors stood on their lawns wrapping thick robes around themselves, staring in absolute disbelief. The retired postal worker next door simply stood on his porch and raised his coffee mug at me, a silent acknowledgement from a man who knew my character, signaling that something was terribly wrong with this picture. And then, I saw her, my wife. She was standing near the mailbox at the end of the driveway, wearing an elegant silk robe I had gifted her for her birthday. She wasn't crying. She wasn't running toward the officers demanding answers. She wasn't screaming my name in terror. She was holding her smartphone up, recording every second of it. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her posture was firmly planted. She had positioned herself at the exact optimal angle to capture her husband being marched out in handcuffs, half naked, in the middle of the night. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. In my 2 decades of interrogating liars, thieves, and corrupt officials, I have learned to read the invisible micro-expressions of the human face. I look for the subtle twitches of deception, the wide-eyed shock of genuine innocence, the trembling jaw of unforeseen trauma. I looked deep into my wife's eyes, searching for the shock or the horror that any innocent spouse would naturally feel watching their world get ripped apart. There was absolutely none. She already knew they were coming. I didn't yell at her. I didn't beg. I didn't demand to know what she was doing. In that frozen moment, the devastated husband died, and the elite investigator took total control. I filed away the unnatural steadiness of her hands. I documented her perfectly dry eyes. I recorded the premeditated, tactical angle of her camera. I placed all of it into a mental evidence folder I was already rapidly constructing. The officer shoved my head down and guided me into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the patrol car. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me in the dark, I watched through the reinforced glass. She slowly lowered her phone, turned on her heel, and walked casually back toward the house. She never looked back. It took them exactly 13 minutes to breach my home and dismantle my life. But sitting in the pitch-black back seat of that cruiser, listening to the sirens wail as we pulled away from my family, my mind began racing at 1,000 miles an hour. Whoever orchestrated this had planned it meticulously, but they had made one catastrophic, irreversible miscalculation. They forgot exactly what I did for a living. The ride to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office took exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes for the deputies in the front seats to pat themselves on the back, believing they had just captured a dangerous white-collar fugitive. And 14 minutes for my mind to completely deconstruct their entire operation. I did not say a single word. I sat in the pitch-black back seat, staring through the thick wire mesh that separated me from the officers. I watched the winding, tree-lined mountain roads of Asheville slip past the window. My wrist throbbed intensely against the unforgiving steel, but my mind was completely detached from the physical pain. My brain was running pure, cold logistics. A pre-dawn, dynamic entry tactical raid is incredibly rare for a financial crime. To convince a seasoned judge to authorize a SWAT-style door breach at 3 in the morning, the informant must provide something aggressively specific. They have to present hard, physical evidence of massive financial theft. But more importantly, they must swear under oath that the suspect is an immediate, high-level flight risk. Or, they have to claim the suspect is actively destroying critical evidence, and a normal daytime arrest would ruin the case. This was not a disgruntled neighbor calling in a noise complaint. This was a highly coordinated, professional assassination of my character. The patrol cruiser slammed into park. They dragged me out of the vehicle and marched me into the precinct. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the station were absolutely blinding after the darkness of the mountain roads. The air inside smelled deeply of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the metallic, sour tang of pure human anxiety. It was the smell of the end of the line. The booking process is intentionally designed to strip you of your dignity. They stood me against a height chart and photographed me in my wrinkled, sweat-stained gray army shirt. They forcefully pressed my hands down, rolling my fingertips across the cold, sticky ink pad. The booking clerk did not even bother to look me in the eye. To him, I was just another piece of human garbage swept off the streets on the graveyard shift. I let them treat me like a criminal. I complied with every harsh command, because I knew exactly what was waiting for them the moment they pulled my permanent federal file. They shoved me roughly into an interrogation room. It was exactly like the 1,000 other interrogation rooms I had utilized over my 2-decade career. Peeling beige paint, a deeply scratched metal table bolted directly to the concrete floor, 2 rigid, uncomfortable plastic chairs. Up in the corner, the unblinking red eye of a mounted security camera recorded my every breath. I had been in rooms identical to this across 3 different continents, but I had always been the man sitting on the other side of the table. A young, heavily gelled patrol officer walked in. He slapped a flimsy paper cup of lukewarm water onto the table, looking at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Charges? I asked. My voice was calm, perfectly level, stripped of any emotion. He scoffed, rolling his eyes as he barely glanced down at his clipboard. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit federal fraud. The bitter, dark irony of his words almost made me laugh out loud. I was being aggressively accused of the exact crimes I had spent my entire adult life hunting down. The young cop spun on his heel and walked out. The heavy metal door locked behind him with a definitive echoing clack. I sat in the plastic chair, took a slow sip of the water, and watched the main bullpen through the small, rectangular reinforced window in the door. The clock on the wall aggressively ticked forward. At 3:47 a.m., the dynamic of the entire precinct began to violently shift. Through the glass, I watched a patrol sergeant standing by a desk. He was holding a freshly printed background check, his phone pressed tight to his ear. He was nodding rapidly to whoever was on the other end of the line. Suddenly, his pacing stopped dead. His face rapidly morphed from routine midnight exhaustion to absolute, wide-eyed panic. He stared at the piece of paper in his hands, slowly lowered the phone, and looked directly across the bullpen toward my closed door. I could see him swallow hard from 30 feet away. The tension in the squad room spiked immediately. Officers began whispering furiously, pointing at the file, pointing at my room. A frantic, nervous energy rippled through the precinct. They were collectively realizing the catastrophic, career-ending mistake they had just made. At 4:12 a.m., the heavy door swung open. The man who walked in was not a beat cop. He was a veteran detective, mid-50s, heavy-set, wearing a rumpled suit and deep, purple bags under his eyes. He possessed the weathered, incredibly heavy expression of a man who had stared into the darkest corners of human nature for 30 years and somehow kept his soul intact. His gold shield read, Parnell. He was carrying a thick manila folder, my background file. He dropped it onto the metal table, scraped his chair back, and sat down with a heavy sigh. He didn't speak. He simply flipped the folder open and began to read. I watched him with absolute predatory focus. Detective Clyde Parnell's tired eyes scanned the first line of the document. His thick brow furrowed. A slight flicker of professional confusion crossed his face. He read the second line. His entire body went completely, unnaturally still. His eyes darted rapidly back to the top of the page. He read it again. And then, he read it a third time, leaning closer to the paper as if his brain was violently rejecting the reality of the words printed on the page. Parnell slowly raised his head. He looked at me, sitting there in my faded boxers and army shirt. He looked back down at the heavily classified federal file. Then, the veteran detective did something I had never witnessed a cop do in the middle of a hostile interrogation. He stood straight up. His posture rigidly snapped into place. The exhaustion completely vanished from his face, instantly replaced by the profound, respectful urgency of a subordinate addressing a commanding officer. Take the cuffs off him. Parnell barked at the young officer standing guard by the door. The young cop blinked, completely stunned by the order. Sir, protocol strictly dictates. Take the damn handcuffs off him. Right now. The patrolman scrambled forward, his hands physically shaking as he fumbled blindly with his keys. The heavy steel clicked open and fell away. I rolled my shoulders, rubbing the deep red welts carved into my wrists. Detective Parnell slowly sat back down. He placed both of his hands perfectly flat on the metal table. He looked at me, not as a criminal suspect, but as a deeply respected peer. Mr. Lockage, Parnell started, his voice thick with disbelief. You spent 22 years as a special agent with the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. I didn't nod. I simply held his gaze. You currently hold an active, top-secret federal security clearance, Parnell continued, reading the tension in the room as much as the file. You have been awarded 2 separate military commendations for dismantling multi-million-dollar fraud syndicates involving senior government officials. The young cop by the door looked like all the blood had drained from his body. He was staring at me like I had just shape-shifted in front of him. 30 minutes ago, I was a dirty, white-collar criminal. Now, I was the apex predator of the federal investigative food chain. Parnell closed the folder and leaned in close. So, I need you to be completely straight with me, the detective whispered. Did someone just try to frame you? The interrogation room was so incredibly quiet you could hear the low hum of the fluorescent bulbs above us. Yes, detective, I replied, my voice completely unshaken. Someone did. Do you know exactly who? I have a very strong suspicion. Parnell studied me intently. He was a genuinely good cop. I could see how much he hated the fact that his department had been maliciously weaponized to execute a terrifying raid on a man who had dedicated his entire life to the law. Who submitted the evidence that generated this warrant? I asked. Parnell sighed heavily. An anonymous tip called in 4 days ago. They provided incredibly detailed allegations of money laundering through your forensic accounting firm. They submitted physical bank statements, client files, and fraudulent transaction records directly to the department. They claimed you were actively shredding documents and preparing to flee the state. Physical documents, I mused, the puzzle pieces rapidly snapping together in my mind. Not emailed, not digitally demailed, because digital footprints are impossible to fully erase. Whoever did this knows standard investigative procedures. I leaned across the cold metal table, placing my hands directly across from his. Detective Parnell, I said, my voice dropping to a low, absolute register of authority. I have spent 2 decades dismantling massive fraud rings across 3 different continents. I have testified in over 40 federal tribunals. I tapped the thick evidence file sitting under his hands. Slide that package across this table. I promise you I will tell you exactly how it was fabricated in under 15 minutes. Detective Clyde Parnell hesitated. In the strict, unyielding world of law enforcement, a suspect is never allowed to casually review their own evidence file. It violates every standard protocol in the book. But the dynamic inside this sterile, fluorescent lit room had completely inverted. I was no longer a suspect trapped in a cage. I was an apex predator, suddenly operating in my natural habitat. Parnell looked at my military record, looked back at me, and made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. He slowly slid the thick manila folder across the cold, scratched metal table. I pulled it toward me and flipped it open. Inside sat 26 pages of meticulously organized financial records, bank statements, client invoices, high-value wire transfer logs. It was a comprehensive, devastating package, explicitly designed to send a man to federal prison for a very long time. When an amateur looks at a forged document, they only read the words. They look at the numbers. But when a seasoned, elite military investigator looks at a forgery, they examine the architecture. They look for the microscopic, invisible fractures in the foundation of the lie. I didn't read the documents. I surgically dissected them. I picked up the very first sheet of paper and held it up to the harsh overhead light. This is a total fabrication, I stated, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. Parnell leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. How can you be so sure? I tapped my index finger against the top corner of the page. This document is supposed to be an official, generated statement from First Horizon Bank, the institution where I actually hold my primary business accounts. But look at the header. It is printed in standard, default Calibri font. I dropped the page back onto the table. First Horizon Bank utilizes a highly specific proprietary typeface called FH Sans for all of their official documentation. I know this incredibly obscure detail because I have forensically audited over 300 forged financial documents in my career. This is a sloppy, off-the-shelf fake. Parnell's eyes widened. He grabbed his yellow legal pad and started writing. I didn't stop. I pulled out a transaction log and slid it directly across to him. Strike two, I said, my tone completely clinical. Look at the primary date on this supposed money laundering transfer. It documents a massive wire movement executed on March 7th. Parnell squinted at the paper. Okay, what about it? March 7th was a Saturday, I replied, staring a hole right through him. Federal wire transfers absolutely do not process over the weekend. The entire banking system is closed. Whoever built this intricate frame job was so focused on the fake numbers, they didn't even bother to check a basic calendar. The veteran detective exhaled a sharp, heavy breath. The realization was hitting him like a freight train. I reached into the folder and pulled out the third piece of evidence. But this one, I paused, tracing the edge of the paper with my thumb. This is the one that tells me exactly whose hands created this entire mess. It was a highly detailed client invoice. It featured my exact business letterhead, my custom, trademarked logo, my precise office address. They got almost every single detail perfectly right, I explained. They had to have extreme, unfettered access to my private files to replicate this. But look at the federal tax ID number printed at the absolute bottom margin. It is off by exactly one single digit. It ends in a 6. My actual, registered federal ID ends in a 4. I neatly stacked the papers, squared the edges, and dropped them back into the manila folder. It had taken me exactly 8 minutes to completely vaporize an investigation that took the police days to build. Detective Parnell, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. The architect of these forgeries had intimate, unrestricted access to my private home office. They knew my financial footprint inside and out. But they lacked the operational experience to avoid the amateur traps I catch on a daily basis. Parnell set his pen down. The room was suffocatingly quiet. "Are you telling me you know exactly who did this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know exactly who did this. My wife." The detective sat back hard against his plastic chair. He rubbed his face with both hands, the sheer magnitude of the situation washing over him. "Mr. Lockage, that is a massive, life-altering accusation to level against your own spouse." "It is a hard fact," I shot back, leaning aggressively over the table. "And I am going to give you the exact roadmap to prove it right now." I dictated my tactical strategy with absolute, unyielding military precision. "The anonymous tip that initiated this raid. You said it was called in on an untraceable, prepaid burner phone. Burner phones are purchased in physical locations. Deploy your deputies right now. Pull the security surveillance footage from every Walmart and gas station in a 20-mile radius of my house for the past 2 weeks. Cross-reference their parking lot cameras for a white 2021 Lexus RX." Parnell was furiously scribbling on his legal pad, desperately trying to keep up. "I guarantee you, detective, you will see my wife walking out of a store with that exact phone in her hand." I pointed down at the folder. "Next, the physical evidence. These documents were printed on high-grade paper. Check the microscopic toner signatures and print alignment. My wife does not own a printer at our house. She utilizes a massive, commercial-grade Xerox machine at her downtown office. Henderson and Cole Appraisal Group subpoena their digital network printer logs immediately. I bet my life you will find the exact metadata matching this forged package." Parnell stopped writing. He slowly lowered his pen. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. It was the look of a man who realized he had brought a butter knife to a gunfight. "I have been a cop in this county for 28 years, Parnell muttered, slowly shaking his head. "I have never, ever seen a suspect completely obliterate their own arrest file from the wrong side of the interrogation table." "I am not a suspect, detective," I replied, my eyes hardening into steel. "I am a target. There is a massive difference." "Why?" Parnell asked, genuinely bewildered. "Why would your own wife go to these extreme lengths to destroy you?" "Because she is desperately trying to hide her own criminal enterprise, and she needed to neutralize the one man who could catch her. To uncover the true, terrifying depth of my wife's betrayal, the local police department wasn't going to be enough. I needed a ghost. I needed to call in a massive favor from my military past to expose the millions she was actively hiding." How does a man who spent his entire life hunting professional liars fail to see the most dangerous con artist sleeping right next to him? People assume I unknowingly married a monster, but that is fundamentally incorrect. I married a woman who slowly mutated into one, piece by piece, like rust silently devouring solid steel. To understand the absolute magnitude of her betrayal, you have to understand why I was so desperately blind to it. For 22 years, my daily reality in the Army CID was human treachery. I investigated decorated colonels, skimming procurement funds. I locked up military contractors defrauding the federal government. I spent decades swimming in the absolute worst of human nature, entirely submerged in secrets, lies, and broken oaths. By the spring of 2014, my soul was completely exhausted. I was stationed at Fort Liberty, deeply burned out, and actively searching for proof that good people still existed. Then, I met Celeste. We crossed paths at a local veterans fundraiser in Asheville. She was a widow. Her first husband had died in a tragic highway collision 2 years prior, leaving her alone with a 5-year-old son, Landon, and a mountain of terrifying uncertainty. When we spoke that night, she possessed a quiet, unbreakable resilience that deeply captivated me. She was actively rebuilding her life from the ashes, working relentlessly at an appraisal firm to provide a stable home for her boy. She didn't just look like a second chance. She looked like absolute redemption. I retired my uniform in 2016. We married in the backyard of the very home she would eventually orchestrate a SWAT raid on. I launched my private forensic accounting firm, utilizing my military skills to help small businesses track embezzlers. We welcomed our daughter, Ellery, in 2018. For a few beautiful, fleeting years, the illusion of a perfect, peaceful life was absolute. The poison didn't enter our home all at once. It seeped in drop by drop, beginning in 2022. Celeste received a massive promotion at the Henderson and Cole Appraisal Group. More authority, wealthier clients, unpredictable, late night hours. Initially, I didn't question a single thing. I had spent decades working punishing military hours. I understood the demanding sacrifice of ambition. But then, the microscopic anomalies began to accumulate. A sudden, unexplained deposit of $4,200 appeared in our joint checking account. When I asked about it, she casually dismissed it as a mid-year performance bonus. But her specific firm did not issue mid-year bonuses. Then came the hardware. I discovered a second, hidden smartphone buried deep in her purse. She smoothly claimed it was a corporate-issued device. I discreetly verified her firm's technology policy. They absolutely did not issue corporate phones. Lie number 2. Then came the calendar discrepancies. Unexplained late nights, perfectly aligning with high-value property closings, digital calendar entries hastily deleted and recreated with entirely different times. The final strike was a crumpled receipt from an upscale restaurant in Hendersonville on a Tuesday night she claimed she was buried in paperwork at the office. The receipt was time-stamped for 9:30 p.m. It documented exactly 2 glasses of expensive red wine. My elite investigator instincts were violently screaming at me. The red flags were practically blinding. But I did the one single thing I had been rigorously trained never to do. I forcefully suppressed my own intuition. I actively chose to look the other way, because confronting the terrifying truth meant destroying the fragile peace I had spent my entire life searching for. I trusted her deeply, completely, and foolishly. That was my greatest vulnerability, and she weaponized it perfectly. At 6:15 a.m., back inside the sterile confines of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, the heavy door of the interrogation room swung open again. My attorney walked in. Judge Whitaker was a 61-year-old legal titan. He possessed a razor-sharp mind, like a steel bear trap, perfectly hidden beneath a polite, velvet southern drawl. He walked into the room carrying 2 massive coffees and a legal pad filled with frantic notes from my terrified stepson. He took one look at me, sitting freely at the table, completely uncuffed, directly across from the lead detective. "Only you, Brennan," Whitaker muttered, shaking his silver head in pure disbelief. "Only you could get dragged out of bed in handcuffs at 3 in the morning and be actively running the precinct's investigation by 5. I didn't smile. The stakes were far too high. "Judge, Detective Parnell is currently securing the local surveillance footage and printer logs to prove Celeste fabricated the arrest warrant," I explained, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "But the forged documents are just a smokescreen. They are the panicked cover-up for a massive, multi-million-dollar financial crime. And to expose the root of it, local police aren't going to be enough." I looked at Parnell. "I need to bring in a ghost." I pulled out my phone and dialed a highly secure number. I was calling Marin Stokes. Marin was an active-duty CID operative still stationed at Fort Liberty. Years ago, we had jointly dismantled a corrupt procurement officer who was systematically robbing the military blind. I had saved her career during that tribunal, and she swore she owed me a life debt. I never intended to collect on it, until today. "Marin," I said the second the line clicked open, "I need an off-the-books deep dive. Right now. Run the name Vaughn Tillery. He operates locally as an estate and property attorney in Asheville." 10 agonizing minutes later, Marin called back. Her voice was ice cold. "Your target isn't just a dirty lawyer, Brennan," she reported, the typing of her secure terminal clacking loudly in the background. "Tillery was formally investigated by the North Carolina State Bar in 2019 for highly suspicious closing practices. He slithered out of it due to a lack of physical evidence. But here is the kill shot." I put the phone on speaker, placing it directly in the center of the metal table so Detective Parnell and my lawyer could hear every devastating word. "Tillery is the silent architect behind a massive network of shell companies quietly registered in Delaware," Marin continued. "In the last 18 months, 3 of those anonymous shells have received massive, systematic wire transfers directly from accounts tied to the Henderson and Cole Appraisal Group." "What is the total financial volume?" I asked. feeling the cold reality settling deep into my bones. 14 separate, highly calculated transactions. The total stolen assets amount to roughly $1.4 million. The room went dead silent. The entire criminal operation instantly crystallized in my mind. It was a classic, devastatingly effective inflation scheme. Celeste was utilizing her professional authority to artificially inflate the appraised values of massive luxury properties, boosting valuations by 20 to 40% on homes worth over $1 million. Vaughn Tillery would orchestrate the closings, secure the massively inflated bank loans, and smoothly siphon the hundreds of thousands of dollars in excess cash directly into his untraceable Delaware ghost companies. They had been quietly robbing banks blind for nearly 2 years. And when my wife realized her own husband, a decorated, elite forensic accountant, was getting too close to her hidden phones and secret bank deposits, she panicked. She decided the only way to protect her $1 million empire was to launch a preemptive strike, fabricating evidence to have me violently locked in a federal cage before I could ever connect the dots. Frame the investigator before he can investigate, Judge Whitaker whispered, his eyes wide as he stared at the phone. My God, it is pure, unadulterated evil. Detective Parnell immediately grabbed his radio. The local precinct was officially out of its depth. He contacted the State Bureau of Investigation. By exactly noon, the FBI had formally opened a massive federal racketeering case into Vaughn Tillery and Celeste Lockage. At 2:15 p.m., exactly 11 hours after my front door was kicked off its hinges, I was officially cleared of all fabricated charges. I walked out of the precinct a completely free man. The crisp afternoon mountain air hit my face, a stark contrast to the nightmare of the early morning. I climbed into my truck and put the engine in drive. My wife was currently sitting at home, falsely believing her master plan had worked flawlessly. She believed I was locked in a concrete cell, stripped of my dignity, my career, and my family. She thought she had all the time in the world to finalize her divorce, steal my assets, and vanish with her corrupt attorney. She had absolutely no idea the grim reaper of her own making was currently pulling into her driveway. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 2:15 p.m., staring at the jagged sheet of plywood hastily nailed over my shattered front door. My wife was sitting somewhere inside that house, eagerly waiting for the phone call that would declare her a wealthy, single woman. She thought I was rotting in a concrete cell. She was already calculating how to file for emergency custody, how to legally steal my home, and how to permanently paint me as a disgraced criminal. She was about to get a ghost instead. I stepped out of the truck. Next door, my neighbor Doyle was standing on his porch. He didn't ask questions. He simply raised his coffee mug in a silent, solemn salute. I gave him a single nod back. I turned the knob and pushed the splintered door open. Celeste was furiously pacing the length of the kitchen floor. Her smartphone was clutched tightly in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. She was completely consumed by her own toxic anticipation. My heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor. She froze. The phone stopped dead in midair. Her head snapped toward the hallway, and her eyes locked onto mine. I have spent 22 years analyzing the micro-expressions of cornered criminals. In a single, excruciating second, I watched my wife's face aggressively cycle through the exact stages of absolute ruin. First, shock. Then, profound confusion. Then, absolute, bone-chilling terror. And finally, hiding underneath it all, was the crushing stillness of a predator who suddenly realizes the steel trap has just violently snapped shut on their own leg. You're home, she stammered, the color completely draining from her face. How are you home? They arrested you. They did, I replied. My voice was a flat, unyielding weapon. The charges were entirely fabricated. The physical evidence was forged. I figured it out. And the lead detective wholeheartedly agreed with me. She couldn't speak. Her grip on her phone visibly shook. You should really call Vaughn, I said, stepping slowly into the center of the kitchen. Tell him to hire the best federal defense attorney money can buy. He is going to desperately need one. I paused, letting the suffocating silence stretch. And Celeste? She looked up, her eyes wide with panic. So, are you? Brennan, I don't know what you think, she started, her voice desperately jumping an octave, trying to deploy the victim routine she had likely rehearsed all morning. Do not, I snapped, holding up a single hand. Do not say another word. I have spent 2 decades listening to highly trained professionals lie to my face. I have interrogated corrupt generals, international smugglers, and thieves in 3 different languages. I have heard every conceivable variation of a lie on this planet, and I can see every single one of them painted across your face right now. Her legs literally gave out. She collapsed hard into the kitchen chair, the exact same chair where we had shared breakfast as a family just 24 hours ago. She buried her face into her trembling hands. How much do they know? She whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her reality. Absolutely everything. I fired back, delivering the final, fatal blow to her empire. The Delaware Shell Companies, the artificially inflated property appraisals, the $1.4 million in stolen federal funds. Vaughn Tillery's open state bar investigation. The security camera footage of you buying the burner phone at Walmart. The digital Xerox logs from your downtown office. All of it. The FBI is already building the federal indictments. I was going to stop, she sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. Real tears, not the calculated performed grief from the driveway. After the next closing, we were going to stop. There is always a next one, Celeste. That is exactly how fraud fundamentally operates. You don't stop because you mathematically cannot stop. Every new transaction is required to bury the evidence of the last transaction. I have explained this exact concept to federal inmates for 22 years. I never, in my darkest nightmares, thought I would be explaining it to my own wife. She looked up at me, her face completely ruined. What happens to us now? Now, the State Bureau of Investigation finalizes their warrants. I said coldly. They will arrest Vaughn first. You will be next. Judge Whitaker is filing to have the false charges permanently expunged from my record. And then, I am taking the kids. Brennan, please, she begged, reaching a hand out across the table. Ellery, Landon. Ellery and Landon are my sole concern now. Not yours. Landon isn't even legally yours, she screamed, a sudden, desperate flash of maternal anger breaking through her panic. He is my son. Landon is 17 years old, I stated, completely unfazed by her outburst. In this state, a teenager his age has the legal right to choose exactly who he lives with, and we both know exactly who he is going to choose. That statement landed like a physical blow to her chest. She physically recoiled, gasping for air, because she knew it was the absolute, undeniable truth. Landon had lost his biological father to a horrific accident when he was 5. For 10 years, I had quietly, consistently built a bond with him. I taught him how to drive. I helped him write his college admissions essays. I showed him how to change the oil in his rusted Jeep. He didn't call me Dad. We had agreed early on to respect his late father's memory, but I was the absolute anchor in his life. And now, she had forced him to watch his anchor get dragged away in chains. I'm sorry, she wept, her head collapsing against the table. I know. I didn't want it to go this far. Vaughn swore the anonymous tip would just buy us time. He promised you would get bail, that the charges would eventually just fade away. Vaughn told you exactly what you needed to hear to keep you compliant, I said, looking down at the stranger sitting in my kitchen. He used you, Celeste, the exact same way he used those fake shell companies. You were just a blunt instrument. And the second you stopped being useful, he would have thrown you directly under the bus. She didn't argue. She couldn't, because deep beneath the greed, the panic, and the desperate lies, there was still a tiny fragment of the intelligent, resilient woman I had married. And that woman fully understood that what she had just done was completely unforgivable. I turned my back on her. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the shattered remains of her life, and headed straight down the hallway. I needed to find my kids. The absolute hardest part of surviving a devastating betrayal isn't confronting the architect of your destruction. It is walking down a quiet hallway and looking directly into the eyes of the collateral damage. I pushed open the door to my daughter's bedroom. Ellery was sitting cross-legged in the center of her mattress, her tiny hands fiercely clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. Landon was right there beside her. His tall 17-year-old frame was awkwardly folded onto the edge of her small bed, and he was quietly reading aloud from a brightly colored picture book about a bear going on an adventure. It was a heartbreakingly pure, desperate attempt by a teenage boy to manufacture a sense of normalcy for his little sister after their own mother had intentionally shattered their universe. Ellery looked up the second the hinges creaked. Her eyes were still red, and heavily swollen from crying. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" "I am okay, sweetheart," I said, walking over and kneeling beside her bed. I kept my voice incredibly soft, stripping away every ounce of the military commander I had been forced to channel all day. "The police broke our door," she sniffled, pointing toward the hallway. "I know, baby, but I am going to fix it. Everything is going to be perfectly safe again." "Landon stayed with me the whole time," she added, leaning her head against my shoulder. "He promised everything would be fine." I looked up at Landon. He looked back at me. In that fleeting, silent exchange of glances, an entire unspoken conversation passed between us. I saw the bone-deep exhaustion of a kid who had been forced to grow up far too fast. But I also saw an unbreakable, resilient steel. "I am incredibly proud of you," my eyes told him. "I know," his eyes replied. "Are you okay?" "I will be." Landon slowly closed the picture book and set it on the nightstand. "Brennan," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone, "can I talk to you later? Alone?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "Whenever you're ready." That highly anticipated conversation finally happened hours later, out on the back porch, entirely shrouded in the thick, suffocating darkness of the North Carolina mountains. The crisp, biting October air had heavily settled into the valley. The distant, rhythmic hum of interstate traffic blended seamlessly with the ambient chirping of crickets. The house behind us was completely silent. Celeste had retreated to the guest bedroom, isolating herself in the ruins of her own catastrophic failures. The heavy wooden floorboards creaked as Landon stepped out into the night. He didn't sit down immediately. He walked to the edge of the railing, gripping the wood tightly, staring out into the pitch-black tree line. "She did this," Landon stated. It wasn't a question. It was a terrifying, deeply painful realization from a son about his own mother. "Yes," I answered simply. I was not going to lie to him. I was not going to sugarcoat the devastation. He deserved the absolute, unvarnished truth. "She actively tried to put you in federal prison," he continued, his knuckles turning white against the railing. "Yes, she did." He fell completely silent for a very long time. I sat there and watched him process a psychological weight that no teenager should ever have to shoulder. He was meticulously calculating the sheer magnitude of his mother's profound treachery. She had willingly orchestrated a terrifying, violent SWAT raid on the only stable father figure he had ever known, all to violently cover up her own insatiable greed. Landon had been intimately carrying heavy burdens since he was just 5 years old. He carried the traumatic memory of the day his biological father never came home from a routine drive. He carried the deep, invisible scars of growing up in a house shadowed by grief. And now, he was carrying the horrifying reality that his mother was a highly calculating criminal. He finally turned away from the railing and sat down on the wooden bench beside me. "If you have to go somewhere," Landon started, his voice thick with a sudden, desperate urgency. "Like, if there is a massive legal custody battle, and she maliciously tries to take me away, I want to stay with you." "That is entirely your choice, Landon," I said, turning to face him fully. "And I promise you, I will aggressively support whatever you decide to do." "I just decided," he fired back instantly, without a single second of hesitation. "Okay. And Ellery needs to stay with you too," he added, his jaw setting with a fierce, protective determination. "She is infinitely safer with you than she will ever be with her." "I know," I replied quietly, "and I will fiercely protect both of you. I swear it." The mountain wind rustled aggressively through the dying autumn leaves. Landon looked down at his sneakers. He aggressively rubbed the back of his neck, visibly struggling to find the exact words for the massive emotion actively swelling inside his chest. "You know I don't ever call you Dad," he whispered into the darkness. "I know," I replied softly, "and I have never ever needed you to. We made a promise to honor your father. I respect that boundary completely." Landon slowly looked up. His eyes were shining in the faint, ambient moonlight. "But you are," he said, his voice cracking violently under the immense emotional pressure. "You know that, right? Whatever catastrophic mistakes she made, whatever horrific things she did, you are my dad. You have been my real dad for a very long time." I didn't say a single word. I physically couldn't. Something massive, heavy, and impenetrable was actively breaking apart inside my chest. 22 grueling years of absolute, unyielding military discipline had meticulously trained me to be completely impervious to pain, fear, and emotional vulnerability. I had stared down armed combatants, sociopathic embezzlers, and corrupt federal officials without so much as blinking. But a 17-year-old boy simply looking at me and claiming me as his father completely shattered every single one of my defenses. I reached out and wrapped my arm heavily around his shoulders, pulling him tight against my side. He leaned into the embrace, burying his face into my shoulder, silently letting go of a decade's worth of built-up tension and traumatic grief. We sat there on the dark porch for hours, two entirely broken people who had actively, fiercely chosen each other over the biological ties of a toxic bloodline. We had cemented a bond that no judge, no lawyer, and no manipulative mother could ever sever. But the quiet, emotional peace of that mountain night was only temporary, because the morning sun was rapidly approaching, and the full, terrifying weight of the federal justice system was about to violently descend upon our doorstep. The wheels of federal justice turn notoriously slow, but when they finally lock onto a target, they crush absolutely everything in their path. 10 excruciating days later, the federal hammer finally dropped. Vaughn Tillery was aggressively hauled out of his pristine, mahogany-lined law office on a beautiful Tuesday morning. Federal agents marched the disgraced attorney directly through his crowded waiting room, parading him past his horrified secretary, his stunned paralegals, and his wealthy clients. He was formally slapped with 14 massive federal counts, including wire fraud, aggravated money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. The very next morning, the FBI arrived at my property. I had meticulously orchestrated the timing. I ensured Ellery was safely sitting in her first-grade classroom, and Landon was studying miles away at a friend's house. I have spent my entire life watching broken people get loaded into the back of police cruisers. It is a haunting, permanent image that radically burns itself into your memory forever. My children had already witnessed enough trauma for one lifetime. I absolutely refused to let them watch their mother get taken away in chains. Celeste did not fight. She didn't scream, and she didn't cry. When the federal agents commanded her to turn around, she simply offered her wrists and let the cold steel click shut. As they guided her down the front steps, she paused, looking back at me standing silently in the hallway of the home she had actively tried to steal. "Take care of them," she whispered, her voice completely hollowed out. "I will," I replied, my voice hard as stone. "I always have." The ensuing legal bloodbath consumed 8 grueling months. Vaughn Tillery arrogantly fought every single charge. He hired a massive team of elite defense attorneys who billed more by the hour than most hardworking families earn in a month. But arrogant men always underestimate the paper trail. The financial evidence was utterly insurmountable. The Delaware ghost companies, the artificially hyperinflated appraisals, the $1.4 million in stolen federal funds. The judge showed zero mercy. Vaughn was sentenced to 7 agonizing years in federal prison. Celeste, realizing she had absolutely nowhere left to run, pleaded guilty. Her defense attorney scrambled to negotiate a desperate plea deal, offering her full, unvarnished cooperation and testimony to Barry Vaughn. Even with the deal, the federal judge sentenced her to 4 years behind bars. She will be approaching 50 years old when she finally breathes free air again. Ellery will be 10. Landon will be a grown man. 3 weeks after my wife was taken into federal custody, my own nightmare officially ended. The fabricated criminal charges hanging over my head were completely and permanently expunged. Detective Clyde Parnell personally called my cell phone to deliver the news. "Mr. Lockage," the gruff, veteran cop said, his tone heavy with genuine remorse, "I owe you a profound apology. My department utilized a battering ram on your home based on entirely fabricated lies. I am deeply sorry. You aggressively followed standard procedure, Detective," I assured him. "You executed a warrant based on evidence that looked incredibly real. The failure was not yours. The failure belonged to a woman who thought she knew me well enough to build the perfect trap, but forgot I was the one who taught her how traps actually work." Parnell let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "For whatever it is worth," the detective sighed, "you are the most terrifyingly competent person I have ever had the displeasure of arresting. I would strongly prefer we never make a habit of it." With the criminal charges erased, The family court proceedings were swift and completely merciless. Facing a half-decade in federal prison, Celeste was legally paralyzed. She could not contest a single motion. I was swiftly awarded full, unyielding legal and physical custody of my daughter. Landon, being 17, submitted a sworn, legally binding declaration to the presiding judge, explicitly stating his unwavering demand to remain permanently in my care. The court instantly granted it. He turns 18 next month. After that, the legal paperwork becomes entirely irrelevant. He is staying in this house because he fiercely wants to, not because a black-robed judge ordered him to. 6 peaceful months have passed since the night the world completely fell apart. It is officially spring. The horrific, splintered mess of my front entryway is completely gone. I personally installed a brand new, incredibly heavy, solid oak door. I drove the massive deadbolt deep into the reinforced frame with my own 2 hands. My neighbor, Doyle, watched the entire construction process from his porch. When I finally finished, the retired postal worker walked over, handing me an ice-cold beer. Door looks solid, Doyle noted, taking a slow sip. Thanks, Doyle. He leaned against the railing, looking intently at the new wood. Brennan, that horrific morning they dragged you out of here in handcuffs. I knew instantly it was a massive lie. I have lived next to you for 5 years. I have watched you fix your gutters, meticulously mow your lawn, and carry your little girl on your shoulders. I know exactly the kind of man you are. He paused, looking down at his boots. And I also knew about her. I looked up, suddenly surprised. I delivered the mail for 30 years, Doyle continued, his voice dropping low. I know exactly who gets what on this street. Your wife was receiving highly confidential certified letters from a shady law firm on Haywood Street. 3 or 4 envelopes every single month for over a year. It wasn't my business to speak on it, but I knew a storm was coming. You are a good man, Doyle, I said, clinking my bottle against his. Inside the house, the storm has completely passed. Landon is rapidly approaching his high school graduation. He just received his official acceptance letter to the university. He aggressively plans to major in criminal justice. When he told me, I laughed and told him he was out of his mind. He looked me dead in the eye and said he wanted to be exactly like me. I told him to be infinitely better. He promised he would try. Ellery is thriving in the 1st grade. Just last week, she proudly brought home a crayon drawing of our family. It featured me, Landon herself, and a floppy-eared rescue beagle named Colonel that I adopted from the county shelter in January, simply because the house felt far too quiet without some chaotic joy running through the halls. Celeste was nowhere to be found in the drawing. When the teacher gently asked about her mother, my 6-year-old daughter simply smiled and said, My mommy is far away right now, but my daddy, my big brother, and Colonel are always right here. I still visit the federal penitentiary once a month. I sit behind the thick, reinforced glass. I slide recent photographs of the kids through the metal slot. I provide brief, clinical updates on Ellery's reading level and Landon's college acceptance. I do not do this out of some lingering, pathetic affection for the woman who tried to destroy me. I do it exclusively for my children. Because one day, my daughter will be old enough to ask incredibly painful questions. And when she does, I need to be able to look her in the eye and honestly say that I never forcefully erased her mother from her life. I am letting Ellery make that profound choice for herself whenever she is ready. During my last visit, Celeste began to weep uncontrollably when she saw Landon's university acceptance letter. He is going to be an absolutely amazing man, she choked out, her tears smudging the glass. He already is, I replied coldly. Because of you, she whispered. No, because of himself. She looked up at me, staring at the man she failed to break. I completely destroyed us, didn't I? Was there ever a moment, a single moment, where you actually believed we were happy? I sat back in the hard metal chair, genuinely contemplating the question. There were years when I fiercely believed it. I answered, my voice totally hollow. Before the burner phones, before the hidden bank accounts. There were nights I walked into that house, smelled dinner cooking, heard the kids laughing, and thought I had finally found the peace I spent 22 years bleeding for. I leaned forward, my face inches from the glass. But now I know that the peace I fought for, I still possess. It is sitting in my living room doing algebra. It is throwing a tennis ball to a beagle in the backyard. I still have the kingdom. You are just the traitor who got exiled from it. I am sitting on my back porch right now, the exact same porch where a terrified teenage boy asked me to be his permanent father. The towering Blue Ridge Mountains are violently blooming with bright, vibrant green after an incredibly brutal winter. Colonel the Beagle is snoring peacefully at my feet. Through the screen door, I can clearly hear Landon patiently helping Ellery sound out difficult words in her reading homework. He is teaching her with the exact same quiet patience I painstakingly taught him. The police violently kicked my front door off its hinges at 3:11 the morning. My wife stood in the driveway and sadistically filmed it. She maliciously tried to strip away my freedom, my children, and my honorable name. She catastrophically failed. Not because I am physically stronger, not because I am richer or more deeply connected. She failed because my 22 years in the military taught me one absolute, undeniable fact about the universe. The truth is incredibly patient. It does not need to scream. It does not need to aggressively kick down doors in the middle of the night. It simply waits in the dark for a man who refuses to stop digging. I found my truth sitting in a cold interrogation room, armed with nothing but my own mind and a stack of forged paper, and that truth completely set me free. What would you do if the person you trusted most in this world tried to bury you alive? Would you panic under the pressure? Or would you sit back, calculate the angles, and let the undeniable truth do the heavy lifting? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story hit home, absolutely smash that like button and subscribe to Dad's Untold Stories for more intense, real life family narratives.